Welcome to Season 2 of Around and Around the OCD Circle podcast. My name is Elizabeth, and I have been living with obsessive compulsive disorder for over 60 years. I am not a therapist or a medical professional. Each week, I will document my struggles and successes while having OCD. I will also speak with ordinary people, just like yourself, from around the globe, who have graciously agreed to share their OCD stories with you. I feel certain you will relate to some or all of their experiences. If at any time you feel like hurting yourself or ending your life, please call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988 if you are in the United States. It is open 24 hours a day, and you will be connected with the nearest crisis center to receive immediate counseling and local mental health referrals. Now, on to today's episode. In today's episode, I speak with Josh Kirschenbaum, a 39-year-old from Philadelphia who is diagnosed with OCD in his mid-30s. Big trigger warning here. Josh shares that he has experienced suicidal thoughts since the age of 6, and these are discussed throughout much of this episode. He discusses the compulsive behaviors he developed, particularly while driving, and the challenges he's faced in relationships. Despite these struggles, Josh has worked through much of it using self-directed cognitive behavioral therapy and is currently in a positive place in his life. Let's listen to his story.
Mhm.
All right, so welcome, Josh, to the show. It's good to see you. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. Why don't you give our listeners a little bit of background about yourself, like where you're from, your age, anything you want to talk about from the beginning?
Sure. Yeah, I'm 39 years old, from a suburb of Philadelphia. Have lived some in Philadelphia. I've lived in Boston. Um, Probably had OCD for most of my life, but I didn't really know until my early 30s. And then because of a lack of health care, I really couldn't get it diagnosed properly until my mid 30s. So that
Hmm.
was a rough ride, but figuring it out piece by piece. And today I'm
So
feeling good.
great. What led you to think there was some kind of issue, mental health
Sure.
wise?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was all of 6 years old, my dad recalls me expressing that I was suicidal. And that kind of got worse as I got older. And I was basically just misdiagnosed with depression. But depression, as it turns out, was really a symptom or a comorbid um, diagnosis. But because I didn't have the stereotypical OCD symptoms, where I wasn't a germaphobe, although I can be worried about germs sometimes, I had kind of my own thing that didn't really click for me until I started doing compulsions, and that actually worked out for a while. And I wasn't rationalizing the compulsions as compulsions. I was rationalizing them as I do these things, and it keeps me from having these suicidal thoughts. And that kind of
Hmm.
worked out for maybe a few years. And again, this was before I realized I had OCD.
Hmm.
And then the compulsions weren't really doing the trick anymore. And what I was doing was I was doing compulsions and going back and forth between being suicidal or just being generally upset and doing these compulsions to try and alleviate the stress. And it really wasn't working. And it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks after some time. I was driving and I was performing these compulsions while I was driving. It was driving me nuts, excuse the pun. And it just kind of clicked for me. Oh my God, I have obsessive compulsive disorder. And it's seriously complicated my life, if not ruined it. Uh, I've led a half decent life, but to me, I was underachieving. I was working a job that didn't pay well. I didn't have health care coverage. And it kind of put things into perspective as far as what was holding me back. But then you hit this wall where you don't know what to do about it. And I had to kind of figure it out piece by piece. Luckily, I had a psychologist from when I was 12, 13, around after my parents got divorced. And he was willing to help me out uh, years and years after I'd last seen him. So I'm eternally in his debt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's kind of the journey that I went through. And even then, because he wasn't an OCD specialist, he was really just a talk therapist. I still had to
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of the work myself and figure out how to go about doing cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So when you were driving and you were doing these compulsions and you said to yourself, "Oh my gosh, I have obsessive compulsive disorder." Where did you get that term from that made you think that that's what you had? Had you seen it on TV or read about it, or
for sure. Yeah,
what made
I'd
you?
seen it on TV.
Uh-huh.
You know, I hate to bring up a joke, but I like the movie What About Bob as a kid, and I really liked the movie As Good as It Gets. But that wasn't
Mhm.
going to help me out at all. I mean, those were films. What really did it for me was I had seen my father's psychologist, and when my father left the room, he wanted me to talk to his psychologist because I was trying to work out some issues. And we
Mhm.
actually talked a lot about my father, and he divulged to me that my father was diagnosed OCD, and he kind of
Mhm.
had kept it a secret from me. And mind you, this was when I was all of probably 15 years old. So I thought back to that and sort of made this connection where there was probably a genetic aspect to my OCD.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of what helped make it click for me was I realized, wow, my father has OCD and I'm doing these things over and over again, and voila, it must also be OCD.
So you didn't see any symptoms in your father growing up?
I mean,
He just kept it totally a secret, or?
I did. I'd noticed that
Mhm.
he would do certain rituals or compulsions while he was driving. He would just do certain things a certain way.
Mm.
Um, he would be obsessed with oral health care. He'd be obsessed with flossing. He'd be mouth washing in the car after we'd eat. And to me, he was just weird. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't thinking
Mhm.
this guy has
Mhm.
a specific diagnosis called OCD. To me, he was just
Yeah.
some mixed up guy who happened to be my
Mm.
father.
Some quirks. Had some
Yeah,
quirks.
exactly.
I
Hmm.
suspect that my paternal grandfather probably had it,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure because I was pretty young when he passed away, but I can still remember things that he would do just so specifically. And if he didn't do it a certain way, he'd get upset. And
Hmm.
so I'm kind of suspecting that he had a form of it, but it
Gotcha.
can be genetic.
Sure.
So then, um, so you were basically left on your own to do the therapy, the CBT. How did you
Yeah.
learn how to do that?
Luckily, I joined a couple support groups on Facebook, and that's actually how I met
Mhm.
you. Thank you. Pleasure.
That
Pleasure to
is,
meet you.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
It's a great group.
sure. So, not in that group, in another support group. Uh,
Mhm.
I had talked about certain things and what was going on, and a lot of people had recommended the book Brain Lock by Jeffrey Schwartz. Um, yeah, he's a doctor in
I've read it.
UCLA. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
amazing. It's actually a hard read because you're reading through all these people's compulsions and rituals, and you're just like,
Yeah.
geez, this is actually making me feel kind of better about myself, even
Right.
though my obsessions and compulsions were legitimate and dangerous for that matter. Uh, he sort of brought in all these other people's perspectives and what they were going through and how they overcame it through his CBT therapy. I thought it was incredibly helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So driving seems to be a real, is that your main thing, or
No, no, I couldn't even begin.
can you explain something that you might do driving that?
Sure. Well, the good news is, let me preface that I don't really do these things anymore.
I'm just trying to get someone who's listening to relate because there are a lot of people that have compulsions while driving. I've
Yeah.
heard.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I have a lot of different OCD symptoms, and I can't even begin to list the compulsions that I've been through because, where do I begin? Where do they start? Where do they
Mhm,
end? They can kind of write themselves as they go. But one that I did often was I'd move my neck, and if I moved it one way, I'd have a compulsion to want to try to move it exactly the same way on the other side of my body. And I would get
mhm,
sort of caught in this wanting to make body movements symmetrical.
mhm,
If I moved my finger on, like my thumb on my left hand, I'd want to move my thumb in a similar way in my right hand. And the problem with that is maybe I'd feel like my thumb, when I move my thumb on the right hand, it would be just slightly off. And I'd try to move my thumb on my left hand just a little bit to try and compensate. And it would kind of just get worse and worse. I could never make it feel just right.
mhm,
Um, so it would kind of just snowball to the point that there was a time I was working and I was actually afraid. I didn't want to move. I was just so exhausted from doing all the compulsions. And just, I knew that if I moved, I was just going to go through these compulsions again. I was just sick of it. I think I ended up sitting down and just sat there for something like 10 minutes. Um, and I ended up being a good employee or whatever, and I left on my own terms or whatever. But, it can seriously interfere with your life and complicate your
mhm,
life. And they are just little rituals, but sometimes it just gets exhausting. And sometimes my joints would hurt because I'd be moving them all day long. They would start to ache like almost like arthritis.
mhm.
Um, so uh, I still catch myself doing it, although it has subsided considerably um,
Mhm.
from all of 4 years ago.
Yeah, even the slightest compulsion, I mean, like that's taking your concentration off of driving. You're
Yeah.
concentrating on your movements. You're not even concentrating on your driving. And even the slightest compulsion can affect your life, and also it can grow. Like you said, then it went to the next thing, and then the next thing, and the
Mhm.
next thing. And
Sure.
my drive, I guess I would say my driving compulsion was at that time I wasn't stepping on cracks or
Mhm.
the edges of shadows, edges of rugs. And so when I was driving, I would jump my eyes over the lines in the concrete.
Oh.
So I'm looking at the concrete in front of me. I'm not really looking at the traffic
Hmm.
to make sure that my eye hits in the middle of every line.
Wow.
And that was dangerous.
Sure.
I don't do it anymore.
Right on.
But
Um, I'd say the scariest part was that when I'm doing these neck things, I might not be checking my blind spot
mhm,
or something like that. So
mhm,
that's really when I thought, I really need to figure this out. I don't like that. I can't give up driving.
no,
Um, right. Because I'd have to work and things like that. And if I stopped working, I would have lost my health insurance, which uh, 4 years ago, my doctor was working with me and trying to work with my health insurance to make it work. Anyway, I couldn't afford to lose my license. So I had to do the CBT route. And that's proven to be very effective.
mhm. And
Yeah.
you did it all on your own.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's the thing that I like about cognitive behavioral therapy is you kind of have to do a lot of the work on your own.
Mhm.
It's good to have a therapist guide you, but you still need to do the work when you're not at therapy.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you been on any medications?
When I was 15, a my dad's psychiatrist probably foolishly prescribed me to Effexor,
Mhm,
which I've had other psychologists and psychiatrists tell me that was kind of not a very smart decision by him. I didn't know any better. at that time when I was 15, I had started experimenting with marijuana. And
Mhm.
so I was mixing them and I
Oh,
would abuse them. I would snort the antidepressant. And after a couple, after all of one refill, I kind of made the decision for myself that it wasn't really a good idea for me to take this medication.
good for you at 15.
Yeah. Hmm.
Wow,
Yeah.
good for you.
Thanks. Well, I'd also
So,
seen what decades of drug use had done to my father.
mhm,
I do believe in medication if you really, really need it. But I also feel like a lot of those meds aren't meant to be taken for a lifetime.
right.
Um, I mean, I realize a lot of people feel like they need to depend on their medication, and maybe in your case or someone's case, you do. But I
Mhm,
do believe that there are ways of using just your own cognitive thought to get around your issues.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I say this on my podcast a lot. I am not anti-medication,
Hmm.
and just because this medicine did not work for Josh doesn't mean it won't work for you. I am presently medication free. That includes blood pressure, thyroid, anything. And I have been for about 8 years, 9 years. But there might be a time later on in my life where I might need to go back on it for a short time. But right now, I'm just giving my body time to adjust to nothing. And I feel great. And I'm not going to add anything until I absolutely need it. So I think sometimes we are over medicated
Hmm.
in this in society.
Sure.
But if you're going to go off your medication, make sure that you are consulting with a doctor first. Because dummy me, I was on an antipsychotic and I just decided I wasn't going to take it anymore. And I quit taking it cold turkey. And I didn't tell my therapist. And I went through, it was bad, the withdrawal. And she's like, Beth, you weren't supposed to do it that way. You're supposed to, cut it down a half, then cut it down, and I just quit taking it. And so make sure that you're consulting with your doctor if you are thinking of, going off any medication at all. And then I think a lot of them, they prescribe medications that bounce off each other and don't work together well. And so just need to be in constant communication with your doctor about how you're feeling and make adjustments. So, so how long has it been now since you were diagnosed? It's been like 9 years, right?
No, no, it's been about 5 years.
About 5 years. So
Yeah, I was 34.
how are you feeling now? And what kind of things help you? Like,
Hmm.
I think you're the first, well, maybe not the first person I've talked to, but a lot of people I talk to are still in treatment. They're in therapy. How do you do this on your own? Because I know there are people out there that need this. Like, health insurance is tough right now in the United States. If you're living in
Yeah,
another part of the world, it's different. I've interviewed people from all over the world, but in the United States, healthcare is just mental health is just not addressed well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of it I was on my own. I feel good lately, but I mean, because it's not something that can really be outright cured. I mean, that's debatable, but I
Managed.
do feel it. Yeah, sure. I do feel it creeping back
Hmm.
all the time. But it's easier to let it go. It's easier to classify the thoughts as just thoughts. If I can recognize a thought and label it as an OCD thought, it's easier for me to let it go. Um,
Hmm.
that sort of awareness is incredibly helpful. So back to what we were just talking about with medication, there were probably times in my life where I should have been medicated,
Hmm.
especially in my 20s.
Hmm.
Um, and in my early 30s, when I realized I had OCD, but I didn't really know what to do about it, the compulsions got really bad and really scary. Like one of my compulsions was putting a loaded gun to my head, and hanging myself. I'm sorry, I should have said trigger warning. Um, and that's serious. You know, if somebody's life is in danger or other people's lives are in danger, you probably should be medicated.
Hmm.
at least in my humble opinion. I'm not a psychiatrist. Uh, but since then, since I've been through the therapy, uh, and I've done the work on my own, it's been a lot easier to manage. Since I've been diagnosed and since I've been through cognitive behavioral therapy, I mentioned earlier that I felt like I was underachieving. Since then, I went back to college. I finished my college degree. I got my bachelor's degree. Um, I started my own business. Um, I became an insurance adjuster,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had a incredibly successful career as a DJ. I'm a turntable DJ. I DJ like hip hop
Awesome.
concerts. Yeah, I mean it definitely had its awesome times and its hard times. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I had been doing that through the extent of my basically my 20s and my 30s, uh, and that helped too. I think one of the issues that I've had also is with relationships. It's incredibly common for people with OCD to be single or have difficulty in relationships, and I've had a lot of fulfilling moments from DJing people's weddings and trying to make that fulfilling for them and try and understanding that it's the most important day of their life. And I haven't had that.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels good taking part and trying to help a couple in that experience together.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I would have had a DJ at my wedding.
Did you have a band?
No,
Okay. Just
no,
have
but what I did was I made a playlist from Spotify
sure.
of special songs, and I had those playing during the reception. And I'm sure some people are like, "Where did this song come from?" But
Yeah.
they were meaningful to us. So,
Well, that's what matters.
hmm
Yeah. Right on.
hmm Do you have specific triggers right now that are triggering these compulsions, or is it just like general stress?
Yeah. General stress, ruminating, thinking too
Uh-huh.
much. I do like to think. I dwell. And sometimes when I'm just thinking very hard, not even necessarily something that's upsetting to me, I can find myself doing compulsions.
hmm
Um, and trivial ones like trying to get my fingers to feel just right or something like that. And I it's that question's another one of those. Where do I begin? Where does it start? Where does it end? I don't know where what triggers me specifically. Everything and nothing all at once. I don't know. It's hard to describe.
So, what is for the future for you? Do you have any goals? Do you want to be in a relationship? Are you in a relationship?
Yeah, I'd like to be in a relationship, but it also scares me because I feel like a bad relationship could undo all the progress that I've made. And uh, I find myself abstaining from relationships. Um, I don't know if you've ever gone through what's the word that I'm looking for? It's the way people relate to each other. There's anxious attachers and there's dismissive avoidance. Um,
Codependence? Codependencies?
Codependency can be part of anxious attachment styles. That's what I'm thinking of. So there's different attachment styles in the way that people kind of relate to one another. Um, I found out that I was an anxious attacher. So when I meet someone, I tend to get this anxious feeling that I'm either not going to be good enough or I'm not going to be what they're looking for. And they're ultimately, regardless of anything that happens and regardless of who I am and how I present myself or regardless of how interesting I am, they're ultimately going to want to leave. And that's kind of my understanding of relationships. That could stem from a lot of different issues, including my parents' divorce. But it's unfortunate that's kind of my inner feeling. And that does, I guess that triggers me. Those feelings of not quite worthlessness, because I know that I have value. And I have had incredible friends who have helped me out throughout this whole thing. They didn't know what was going on either. They just, wanted to be there for me. But as far as relationships go, uh, it would oftentimes be more upsetting, or it would feel like it was more upsetting than it was worth. Which is tough because everybody needs somebody. We all need people. My psychologist, who I would say saved my life, his belief is that we're on this planet to relate to one another, and we're social creatures. And that's crucial to who we are as a species. So, I'm trying to.
I can't hear you. Can you say that again? I couldn't hear
Okay,
that.
yeah, I'm trying to find this silver lining between having people in my life and avoiding a relationship, and that's proven to be pretty difficult. Um, and that hasn't helped by the fact that I've been really, really in love. I go through this thing called limerence. Have you heard about this?
What's it called?
Limerence. It's
No.
not a common word. Most people, I would even think most psychologists, psychiatrists don't know this word. Limerence is the scientific term for love madness, for basically love sickness or love obsessions. I would get enthralled with someone, and it wouldn't quite be infatuation, because infatuation would involve, oftentimes it would be mostly sexual in nature. Of course, I wanted to have intimacy with the person who was the object of my affection. But when you're in limerence, it's more thinking about wanting to have a life with someone and obsessing over that. When you're in limerence, you can obsess over the same person for up to something like 80% of the day. I mean, it's basically like being addicted to a person. And it's scary, not for the person that I was obsessing over. It was scary for myself, because if I felt like I wasn't good enough, I would get suicidal. I would, that's where I would be putting a gun to my head, be almost hanging myself, um, just feeling generally unworthy. Um, and I've been through that multiple times in my life. When it's with someone who is good for you, it could actually be a beautiful thing. But because limerence and love for that matter blinds you, limerence can get you involved, or wanting to be involved with someone who might not even be available or might not be good for you. Um, so that's a whole different kit and caboodle in and of itself. That was difficult as well, but I've been learning to manage that as well.
Mhm. I've never heard of that word. That's my OCD is with people,
Okay.
and but it can be a person I've never met.
Okay.
It could be someone I know. It could be someone I don't even like.
A
It
stranger.
could be
Oh,
someone.
oh wow.
Mhm. And if you listen to my story on my podcast, it'll, you know, tell you a whole lot more about it. That's why I had so much difficulty getting diagnosed, because even as early as 1991, I was seeing people and psychologists, and saying, I'm obsessed. And not one time did they ever say, oh, you have OCD. Never.
Right.
Because back then that was OCD was, as good as it gets related. Washing your hands over and over, checking the locks over and over. It wasn't you're obsessed with a person.
Right.
So I had to do these rituals to keep them from dying, or to keep them safe.
Sure.
And
It's pretty common.
gosh, it's common now, but boy, back then I couldn't get anybody to tell me what was the deal. A little,
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so do you like having, like, with your job? Are you like working from home where you don't have to like be around people? Was it difficult being around people in a work environment for you, or?
It can be, because here's the thing. I especially after getting over my OCD, and I'd say even before that, I'm very hypersensitive to BS. I don't like seeing BS in people. I don't like feeling like I'm being BS'd. So I can kind of be standoffish if someone's being kind of ridiculous or trying to push the ridiculous off on me. I generally relate very well with people in general. But if someone is showing any sort of narcissistic characteristics or something, I could get kind of huffy and puffy. So in that sense, when I've worked with a lot of people, I'll get along great with 80% of the staff and just really, really not get along with like a couple people. Just because I can't stand fake. I don't know if it's fake behavior, because fake behavior is actually pretty common. People lie multiple times a day just instinctively. But I would say I can't stand malicious behavior. And for that matter, I'm also hypersensitive to uh, not people not being honest with themselves. So I'll be hypersensitive to people's cognitive distortions. I might try to help someone. Like my friend, he had brain surgery a couple years ago, and he has these uh, thoughts, these almost visions that the devil is trying to kill him. And I tell him, it could be. Who am I to say what's real or what isn't? It could be, but you have to at least consider that this is your imagination running wild. You have to, because people do that from time to time, right?
Right.
Yeah. And just trying to reach people, it can be very hard, because as it turns out, I think the average person has cognitive distortions all the time. Uh, and as far as OCD is concerned, I read somewhere that people, something like 90 some percent of people have OCD type symptoms throughout their lives. And I don't think that necessarily means that people have OCD. I think a lot of people have OCD without realizing it, like I did. But I really believe that every contemplative person has obsessions and compulsions. And it's important for people to kind of rationalize how much obsessions and compulsions play a role in their lives. And it could just be people have a tendency to put their socks on a certain way in the morning, or have a ritual when they get in and out of the bathtub. Those are trivial. It's not that big of a deal. But so we are having kind of this clash in our society where I think people are becoming wise to their own obsessions and compulsions. But the average person labels it as OCD, and then you have people who are really diagnosed OCD who are saying, wait a minute, my life is hell. How dare you trivialize what I'm going through by saying that you're OCD because you like to clean the table before you eat breakfast or something like that.
How do you feel about those posts? Do you just let it go, or does it irritate you? I ask this to almost every single guest this comes up.
Sure. It ultimately does not irritate me, because to my point, I think people need to be more cognitively aware of their obsessions and compulsions.
When they say, I'm so OCD about that.
Yeah. Well, my first thought is, maybe you are. I didn't know that I was. Who am I to say? I think it's important for people to ask themselves those questions and consider, maybe I do have OCD. Put into context the obsessions and compulsions that you have every day. And if it takes out more than a couple or a few hours of your life a day, or if it interferes with your life and makes you underachieve, then yeah, you have a disorder. But if you're using your obsessions to your advantage, and that's kind of my main thing, is I want to turn the tables on my obsessions. I want to take them from being something dark, and I want to obsess over something that's actually useful, like working on my DJing or studying math, because that's going to help me with my insurance adjusting. And all those things actually, in effect, make me feel better, because I'm not ruminating on things that hurt me. I'm ruminating on things that will help me. And I really believe that a lot of successful people are incredibly obsessed. And I'm sure there are complications that go with that, but some of the most successful people in history harness their obsessions to their advantage, in my humble opinion.
Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to bring up?
I'm sure I'll shoot out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning tonight thinking, oh, I should have said this, but right now
Well,
nothing
you're
comes.
always welcome to come back on. I've had several guests that have come back on and said, hey, I wanted to address this and I forgot. Or
Oh, well, thank
so
you so
you're
much.
always welcome to come back on.
I really appreciate that.
That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
This is your platform. This is really not my podcast. It's everyone's.
Right on. I really appreciate that. I guess my best advice would be try to spin it positive. We all have our things. With OCD, it's manageable. You're not stuck. I've felt stuck a lot of times in my life. I have, and sometimes I'll feel stuck day to day. From time to time, but there are ways to work around that. There really are.
Mm-hmm. And any other words of wisdom you want to leave our listeners?
Um, yeah, I think I threw it all out there. But again,
Mm-hmm.
If something comes to mind, I'll definitely message you.
Mm-hmm.
See if,
Yeah, you have really come a long way, Josh, and you should be extremely proud of yourself. And you've done so much of this on your own. I mean,
yeah,
someone gave you the tools, right? But like a book gave you the tools, but you went with it.
yeah,
And I hear this a lot of time on the board that um, I need to start ERP or I need to start CBT, but I'm too scared. I'm too
sure,
scared. And, it is scary to start
yeah,
because you have to feel the anxiety and people don't want to feel the anxiety. And it is scary, but for me, it's been totally worth it.
oh yeah. That's my thing. You have to face the music. You have to face the
Hmm.
anxiety. You do, and that can be very fulfilling. There were times in my life where I couldn't make a layup for basketball, but
Hmm.
here I am going out and performing on turntables at concerts.
Hmm.
And it does, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but it takes a lot of courage. A
It
lot of people are
does.
afraid to public speak. I'm taking it 2 steps higher
Hmm.
where I'm going to be scrutinized.
Right.
Um,
Get out of your
yeah,
comfort zone.
for sure. Yeah.
You have
Have
to
to get,
just take that leap of faith and do it.
yeah.
So, does your family know about this now and your friends? Like, are you very honest with people or do you tend to hide it like your dad did? And not that either
I,
one is better or worse, but
I'm an oversharer. I don't do it on social
okay.
media, but with my friends and family, because I was so hurt that I didn't know for so long, I want as many people to know that you
Hmm.
can be afflicted with something and not know it.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I
Yeah,
find
it's
myself
just
having
been in the last 10 or so years that I've just let people know, hey, you know, this is me and this is what I have and this may happen, you know. That's why um and I was very, very honest when I started dating again. I just said, they got to know. I
yeah,
don't want to get, like you said, attached to this person. They find out they can't deal with it. We break up. Got to know from the start. This is how I am, and I'm doing my best.
yeah. I'd say we're doing pretty well considering. I
Hmm.
think there's a million things that I would not rather have than OCD. Because OCD is manageable,
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't feel like I'm unlucky. I feel like there's a million
Hmm.
things I could have that are way worse.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are a lot of worse off than we are, and that's one of the things I also talk about a lot on my podcast is to find those situations and help people who are worse off than you are. Then you will see it will humble you. It could be a lot worse. You know,
Yeah.
and helping other people helps yourself, and volunteering or whatever, whether it be to hold kittens or
Yeah,
cook
it does
cook
help.
meals or whatever. I mean, there are,
At the same time, I've been, I 100% agree with you. At the same time, well, I guess I'd have to say 90% because I'm about to contradict myself. Because sometimes, I feel like somebody could see the turmoil I wear it on my face, and you'd be surprised at who would come out of the woodwork um, to not help you, to take advantage of you, because we are vulnerable, and that's something that was really embarrassing for me as a man because most people wouldn't think that. But, I would find myself hanging out with anyone and everyone uh, just to escape this sort of solitude where I'm ruminating. And that didn't always equate to a healthy lifestyle.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I do have a lot of healthy friends. I've kept a lot of the same friend groups from high school, so I'm blessed in that respect.
Yeah, that's important also to hang out with people who are mentally healthy, right?
Yeah, sure.
Because I've been on that before too. I've hung out in support groups. Not that support groups aren't great, but I mean, that was all I was hanging out with. And I was taking on all their shit,
Sure.
and that was not good.
Yeah,
That
you
was
have to
not
find a
good.
balance. I do have
Yeah.
friends who are mentally ill, and I have friends who are perfectly sane and leading completely normal lives
Mm-hmm.
with a family and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to find this healthy balance of the two.
Well, it was great to talk to you today. Be sure you stay in the studio until the recording is uploaded.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, you're welcome to come back anytime.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's been so much of a pleasure, and thank you for having me on your show. And I've only known you a few days, but it's really been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you related to Josh's experiences in some way. If you or someone you know would like to share your OCD story on this podcast, feel free to reach out to me via my social media links, which are listed in the show notes. Don't forget, we also have a supportive Facebook group under the same name, where you can connect with others without judgment. Join me Thursday morning for a midweek motivation episode, and next Monday for another full episode of Around and Around the OCD Circle. Remember, while OCD cannot be cured, it can be managed. I'm living proof. Thank you for listening and sharing.